Hey, my name's Brett. Welcome to On Hand Art. Have you ever taken a trip and wished you could capture the feeling of being there? My recent trip to the Grand Canyon was just like that for me. So today we're going to use some simple materials to make a cozy shelf canyon. After figuring out how much space a canyon will take up on my bookshelf, I made a quick sketch of the box parts and dimensions. I then measured twice and cut everything out with my oscillating cutter. And it was then that I realized I mismeasured twice and all my cuts were wrong, which is why I planned very loosely. So I stole these cake boards from my wife. Now the good thing is they are easier to cut and glue together, and I have a whole stack so I can double them up for a stronger box, which is also easier to do when you have plenty of white glue. And this time I measured 3 times, so all my cuts were perfect. And it was literally a handful of cuts with the box cutter. And luckily I still have the wooden bottom that I did cut out correctly. To assemble the box, I'm just using some white glue and then hot gluing everything in place to tack it while it dries. To make sure it's square, I'll be using these little squares, but you can basically use anything that you know is a 90-degree angle and it's not going to move on you. I'm priming the inside of the box and the back panel with gesso. This is just to help with painting. It's not really there to help with gluing things in place or anything like that, but it will seal up the paper and make painting much nicer. To make sure everything looks and flows the way I want and still fits in that space inside the box, I made a full-size map of the river and cliffs. The negative spaces will allow me to rough in where I want those cliffs. Just remember to mark which end of the template is the front. As you put it down and pick it up, it's going to help a lot later. You might notice that the map is also too small, and that's because I changed how I constructed the box. Now, these are just things you're going to run into with any art piece, but it's also why I allow the piece to dictate the direction. In this case, it just means I have a little more room to work with. I'll also use this map to cut out the river using a sheet of this protective film. Now, this is the stuff you peel off electronics when you get them, and I don't know why this stuff is so thick, but it's definitely the reason I decided to keep it around. I'm painting the underside of the plastic with a loose mix of blues and white, following the curve of the river. Making sure to keep the paint loosely mixed will give it more of the look of an uneven, kind of flowing storybook river. And then painting on the back of the plastic will give it a shiny, watery look when I flip it back over. Now remember, when you paint on the back of a clear material, you're really painting in reverse. So where you would normally be putting down the background first, on canvas for example, you're really painting the foreground first. Just something to keep in mind. You'll also notice that I'm painting very thick. And this is just to make sure that the paint mixes as I go, and then also keeps the river opaque when I'm done and turn it back over. For the cliffs, I'm using Clay. This is essentially powdered paper mache. It's a brand name. Admittedly, I'm not a fan of this product because it takes forever to dry, but I think it's going to be the best product for this application. Now, to keep the surfaces thin, I'm making a scaffold of aluminum foil, and then this plastic mesh that comes under takeout pizzas. You don't need the plastic mesh, I just felt like it would help the paper mache stick a little bit better. With those in place, I'm skinning the front sides of the scaffolds, trying to keep the paper mache as thin as possible. I'm also working in the texture of the cliffs to kind of somewhat match the way they really look. So that means the top 2/3 of these cliffs are kind of a horizontal stripe, if you will. And then the bottoms are more of a vertical stripe, kind of where the rocks fall and pile up. Then it's just a matter of being really patient as they dry. which means I have about 3 to 4 days to start working on the rest of the elements, so I'm going to start with the moon. To give the moon a glow, I'm painting it in 2 layers on the same sheet of plastic I used to make the river. The glow is going to be a large, thinly painted circle of yellow and yellow ochre. The moon uses the same colors, just thicker, and then I drop the paint in place to make the texture. And then once that's dry, I'll go over just the moon with some gold paint, and that will warm it up, give it a little bit of a sparkle, and make it even more opaque. And then once those are dry, I'll cut them out using a pair of craft scissors, nothing special, and then glue them together with some clear contact cement. And then I'm just making sure I don't use too much glue so that it doesn't squeeze out and kind of ruin the whole thing. I'll add a bit of kitsch with an LED light, and I already have a bunch of these smiley faces that are ready to do their part for art and country. They're just the perfect size. And then a quick snip to get rid of the lights I don't need, and then a drop of glue to attach it. And I'll definitely be able to use those extra lights for something. They will not go to waste. With the cliffs dry, I'm painting in the sky. Since this is a twilight scene, it's essentially medium dark blues and purple. And then I'll be painting with a loose mix of those colors and a good amount of texture just to give it a storybook look. And then we can add in a few stars afterwards. Now, the upper 2/3 of the cliffs are reds and corals. I'm color matching a photo I found online, so the coral is kind of a red, orange, and white. But to get to that final color, I'm adding in a red-brown mix. And you'll notice that I'm fully mixing the paint. This will make up the background color for the upper areas of the cliffs. Once that's in place and dry, I'm coming back over with the darker burgundy brown color that's over that, and then filling in the rest of the spaces by just dabbing it on and then feathering it in, and just kind of allowing the piece to tell me what it wants to look like. Now, the great thing about paper mache is that it already has kind of a rough, rocky texture. The rest of the look is just a lot of blending in each layer of color. Then the bottom third is a background of yellow, but a lot of gray, black, and then streaks of white. Now, before we go any further, just notice how I'm holding the brush. Many new painters hold the brush near the bristles, kind of like a pencil. But you'll find that with a tiny bit of practice, you'll find you have a lot more control if you hold back further on the handle. Alright, now each of these layers of color are still wet as I gently dab them on and then feather them in. Again, holding the brush really far back on the handle. With the cliffs painted and dry, we can now drop the river in place. I discovered that I can actually cut the back tail off, which, too bad I painted it already, but it makes it much easier to put in place. And then all I did was glue it with some contact cement and then cut a slot for the canoe. And speaking of the canoe, since this is a bookshelf canyon, we need a book canoe to make the voyage. Now, I made the canoe out of the cover of a book, and the pages are just some cardstock. It's all held together using some paper glue. And then pushing from the ends, it makes kind of a canoe shape. And then I'll clamp them in place just to kind of give it the look of a canoe, but also to hold that canoe shape. When it's dry, I just glued it into the slot I cut in the river, and it's ready for a little boater to paddle up the river. Wait, down the river? Either way, I'll get to the boater in a second. And since this is a bookshelf canyon, we're gonna need some books. The cores are just blocks of basswood in 3 sizes from small to large. I'll explain the reason for that in a bit. The covers are slices of a photo I took while we were at the canyon. And I chose the photo more for the colors and patterns to give me some contrast between the books and the cliffs. And then I'm simply wrapping each core, marking and cutting, doing that over and over again. I'm using paper glue to hold it all together. You can use hot glue, but it's going to be a little bit messier. And then I'm setting them under a weight to dry. Once they're dry, I'm making the spines by gently pinching them with this wire. And here's a comparison of all 3 sizes of books. And now we can add the books to the cliffs, basically putting them wherever looks good to us. Now, I started off using contact cement, but that took a long time kind of holding them until they were dry, so I switched to hot glue and that went much faster. I'm putting the smallest books in the back, the largest ones towards the front, and that will give us a sense of scale as you're looking down the canyon. And we need a little canoeer, and he definitely needs an oar to stay on course. I started with a sketch and a scrap of basswood, and then I'm filing, kind of making marks where the oar curves, and then carving with a box cutter. And you can definitely use a smaller hobby knife, this just happened to work for me. I'm using Sculpey to make the little guy. I don't normally work this small, so I'm starting with some basic shapes. His body is a rectangle where I'll attach a ball for the head. Using this clay needle, I'll blend the head to the body and then start shaping the neck and his hat. At first I was going for a bucket hat, I thought that'd be kind of funny, but it kind of morphed into a baseball cap, so kind of went with that. Once that's in place, I'll attach his arms, and those are just little noodles. Before baking, I'm attaching the oar, and then with our boater held in place with some hot glue, I can paint him. Not only do I like these colors, I chose them because I thought they would show up in the scene while not taking over too much attention from the rest of the story. After all, he is a part of the story, but the cliffs and the books are the main characters. And yes, most of my work is a self-portrait, so that is me in the canoe. Now on to attaching the moon, which is just a little bit of hot glue to hold the wires and battery pack in place, and a dust jacket, which has a cover mostly for the comedy of it. You'll never see the sides, which is why I only partially printed the other side. You really only need the front edges to show up. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it inspired you a little bit and helps you to see that you don't need expensive materials to express your art. Now, I was inspired, of course, by the Grand Canyon, but also the artwork of Serena Supplee, who I hope I'm not butchering her name. She's a visual artist who lives and works in that area. Her work is just beautiful and just inspired me to kind of mash all of those visuals up with the stories, the concept of those stories of the Grand Canyon, our whole trip out there and all of that. Anyway, if you did like this video, please consider subscribing. Maybe tell a couple of friends who are interested in art. Let's grow a community of people who want to inspire each other. Anyway, without further ado, here's the Book Nook.